Denver Nuggets avoid the play-in tournament? Are we witnessing a potential fracturing within Denver's locker room? And yes, we will have another special guest to help us continue counting down our Mile High milestones, celebrating 30 years of Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan. All things to come on today's rundown, and we begin, unfortunately, in the NBA, where we witnessed the Nuggets lose their fourth straight game of the season. They lose 125 to 120 to the Indiana Pacers. And questions are starting to swirl in a number of categories about this Nuggets team. One, after 2 weeks ago looking like they had a legitimate chance to hold down the number 2 seed in the West, trailing only the Oklahoma City Thunder, who sit on the NBA's mountaintop, are they now in a situation where they're going to have to face a play-in scenario to get into the postseason and finalize their seeding? And there's questions about Russell Westbrook's effectiveness, whether or not the supporting cast around Nikola Jokic, which thus far across the season has fallen short a lot of times, whether or not that is wearing on the mental load that the superstar center is having to balance, and whether or not they still have core pieces left that can make them true championship contenders. There's also the question about Jamal Murray, who's been dealing with hamstring injuries and has missed his 5th straight game heading into last night with, as according to Michael Malone, no real timetable into the future. But the saddest part about all this, and it always centers around Nikola Jokic, as everything the Denver Nuggets do typically does, is that Nikola Jokic has put together one of the more unbelievable 3-game stretches in the NBA this season, and yet the Nuggets are 0-3 in their last 3 games. Go ahead and take a look at Nikola Jokic's box scores in the last 3 games, the first of which was the greatest triple-double in NBA history at 61 points, 10 rebounds, and 10 assists, eclipsing James Harden and Luka Doncic, who both completed 60-point triple-doubles in their careers, but never eclipsed it at 61. Prior to that, he had a signature Sombor double with 33, 12, and 9, falling 1 tally short of a triple-double there. And then most recently against Indiana, a 41, 15, and 13 outing. Looking at those numbers, it is almost impossible, especially when you score 61 points in an NBA game, to figure that you did not win that contest. And I know it went to double overtime and there was more time to do it, so it's not like that happened in regulation. But still, you're accounting for almost 50% of your team's points, and you scored more than 120. So I don't know that there's anything more truly that Nikola Jokic himself can do, either as a scorer or as a distributor. He has at times seemed to lack a little bit on the defensive side of the ball. But again, when you look at the contributions he's providing in every other facet of the game, it's hard to imagine that he could be that much more of a complete impact player, considering he's just one guy and he's already maxing minutes and contributing as a distributor, contributing as a scorer. It really falls to the supporting cast around him, and thus far, they just have not been worth the salt. You got a career high in points from Christian Braun, who's clearly a winner and has an aggressive mentality and doesn't like to lose. And you're going to get the best, whether it's good enough or not. You're going to get the best effort out of Christian Braun night in and night out. But it's everybody else that has just seemed to falter for one reason or another from a consistency standpoint that just makes this team a genuine question mark about whether or not, first of all, where they're going to be in the Western Conference standings when the postseason rolls around. And then once we find out where they're slotted, whether or not they can win. You look at last night as a microcosm. There's no Jamal Murray for a 5th straight game. Aaron Gordon chips in 5 points. Michael Porter Jr. has double-digit points, but he's 1 of 9 from beyond the arc, which by and large is his greatest contribution to the Nuggets, especially offensively, is when he's able to find his stride and make shots from beyond the arc as a team that struggles from the three-point line. It's just not good enough. Russell Westbrook was the anti-hero in 2 of their last 4 losses for sure, with his blunders at the end of the Timberwolves game in double OT, and then having a handful of missteps and mispossessions at the end of the next game where he had 3 turnovers. The Nuggets, even last night, 3 turnovers in 4 possessions of which Russ was a part of. And the 9 other players, when you're not looking at Nikola Jokic and Christian Braun, the 9 other players who contributed in the box score for the Nuggets, massed a total of 49 points. That's just not going to be good enough against the top-tier teams in the Western Conference. It may not even be good enough amongst the middle-tier teams in the Western Conference, which the Nuggets are now having to open up and look at as potential postseason options. Because if you look at the standings in the Western Conference, yes, you can look at that and say, hey, the Nuggets are the 4 seed in the West. They're in the top half of the Western Conference. But those standings, in my opinion, are fugazi. The Thunder are obviously going to be the number 1 seed, and it looks more and more like the Rockets have a solid chance to lock up the 2 seed. But if you look at the seeds from 4 through 8, they all have 32 losses in the loss column. The only thing putting the Nuggets ahead of those 4 teams in the Clippers, the Warriors, the T-Wolves, and the Grizzlies is that they have a game in hand in the win column at 37. So I don't take any security or solace in the fact that saying, hey, the Nuggets are a 4 seed in the West. They're doing what we wanted them to do last year, as Jake Shapiro wrote about at DenverSports.com. They are prioritizing health over standings, which we saw them try to prioritize the standings in the last postseason. They fought hard. They end up as the number 2 seed in the West, only to get bounced off their home floor in embarrassing fashion in the second round by the Minnesota Timberwolves. So yes, while you can say, hey, look, they're prioritizing health over seeding, they're not looking very healthy. Aaron Gordon has been a roller coaster health-wise with his lower body injuries. Jamal Murray is currently missing his 5th straight game. And even worse, Jamal Murray, who was the second best player on a title team for the Nuggets when they won the championship and is still expected to hold that expectation, especially after a 4-year, $200 million contract extension. There's not even a timetable right now for Jamal Murray's return. Michael Malone, when asked about it after the game, said, quote, hopefully he, being Jamal Murray, is able to be back by then meaning the playoffs. This has been a weird one. Day to day, then all of a sudden it's not day to day. So if we're looking at with 3 games left in the regular season and Jamal Murray is regressed from day to day to back, that's not load management and health considerations. He's just hurt. And I don't know if Jamal Murray is not ready to go by the start of the postseason, or even if he is ready to go, if he's a shadow or a shell of himself, which has already been kind of an up and down season for Jamal. That is not a positive outlook for the Nuggets, even in a first round context. And man, if this Denver Nuggets team, who just the last month or so, it has felt like outside of some unbelievable games from Nikola Jokic and maybe a career-high spurt from Aaron Gordon for a night or Christian Brown for a night, the vibes have just been bad. They've just been kind of ugly, and that's not the tone you want heading into a postseason for a team who has done little at the trade deadline and in the offseason because of money that they've tied up and their navigation of the first and second apron and the way that you have differing philosophies between the head coach and Michael Malone, who is like a head coach typically is, pushing the chips in the center of the table, all in to win right now. And Calvin Booth, who famously and potentially infamously, as we look back in hindsight years from now, said he wants to take the San Antonio Spurs approach of, winning 3 titles in 6 or 7 years and not being so focused on going back to back. You have a difference in philosophy there that I think is manifesting itself, and I think it's seeping into the locker room. You saw, despite the fact that the Nuggets were able to go up with decent leads in this game against Indiana, you have situations where Aaron Gordon and Payton Watson are getting into it on the sideline. You've seen multiple times in this 4-game losing streak where Nikola Jokic looks a mixture of frustrated and defeated and confused and angry at the way the team is going, knowing that he, who's doing everything he possibly can from a singular player standpoint as the sun with which this team revolves around, and it's still not enough. And when the best player in the world, with a series of max level contract players around him, is not enough to even hold potentially a top 4 seed in the Western Conference, that spells serious potential shakeups and changes in the offseason. And if the Nuggets get bounced in the first round, for sure, or if it's a mirror image of last year where they lose in the second round, hopefully not as embarrassingly as it was against the Timberwolves, getting boat raced off your home floor after a 20-point lead in a Game 7 at home, we could definitely see a little bit of an explosive element thrown into this locker room with the departure of certain executives, like potentially Calvin Booth, certain coaches like Michael Malone, and or a combination, if not a singular player like Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray, and the like. So I cannot express, in my opinion, enough how pivotal this offseason or this postseason is for the Denver Nuggets because of the ramifications it could have in the postseason. And as of now, the vibes are not high enough for me to have a lot of confidence. All right, it is time, on a lighter note, to continue our Mile High Milestones countdown presented by your local Ford dealers. We have been counting down 30 of the biggest storylines in Colorado sports over the last 30 years in celebration of the 30th anniversary of Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan hitting the airwaves here in town. And while I just spent 11 minutes and 16 seconds telling you why I'm very frustrated and concerned with the 2025 Denver Nuggets, today's milestone, which we cracked the top 5, takes us back to a simpler and happier time with those Denver Nuggets when they won the 2022-2023 NBA championship for the first time in franchise history. And to help us take this walk down memory lane, we bring in Andy Feinstein, who many basketball fans in this market will remember, the founder of a very fun-titled website, InspireGeorgeCarl.com, which later became Denver Stiffs, which most Nuggets fans here in town are very familiar with. Andy, thank you so much for joining us. You, as a Nuggets historian of sorts, are as equipped as anybody to take this trip down memory lane with us. And while it's hard maybe to juxtapose looking at this team where it just felt like everything went right compared to the current iteration of the Nuggets where everything feels like it's going wrong, my first question, Andy, is going back to this year. And at this point, obviously, the Nuggets had never won a title in their 47-year history as a franchise, but they had kind of blipped on the radar a handful of times dating back to their ABA days when you had David Thompson, and then you fast forward to the 80s with Fat Lever and the Carmelo Nuggets where they went to the Western Conference Finals, the bubble team. It was like they could get close, but they were never going to be a team that was going to get there, and that kind of seeped into them and their reputation as a franchise. So heading into this year where Nikola Jokic is well on his way to blossoming as one of the NBA's best players, what was your memory and thought about this team heading into that season? And did you believe at that point that the Nuggets were going to be capable of reaching the mountaintop that Nug life had thus far prevented them from?
Well, Richie, thank you for having me on, first of all. Happy anniversary to you guys. My wife will attest to this, okay? So I'm a lifelong Nuggets skeptic and a lifelong cynic, because that's what happens when you embrace Nug life since the day I was born, right? Always woulda, coulda, and shoulda. We know about David Thompson in 1978. We know about Alex English in 1985. We know about Carmelo Anthony's team in 2009. You know, as you said, knocking on that door. We just knew going into 22-23 that could be our year. Things were just set up right for the team. Jamal was healthy. Give the organization credit for giving him that year and a half to recover from the ACL. That was critical. And we were so confident that we even had a summer trip planned in June that we canceled. And we blocked out 2 weeks of June to be home for the NBA Finals. That's how confident I was. And usually that's a jinx. But there was just something about the 22-23 Nuggets season. We just knew that was the year. We just felt it. I say as a family, as friends of mine, as Nuggets fans, Denver Stiffs fans, etc. We just knew it. And the reason is typically when you have an MVP, typically when you have the best player in the world and you're knocking on that door, usually you break it down and you get through. Usually, if you look at the history of the NBA, there's only a handful of guys that have won MVPs that have no ring to show for it. Hopefully Shai Gilgeous-Alexander will join that list this season. But typically when you have a guy that's as good as Jokic, they don't just win one ring, they win multiple, which we can talk about what's standing in the way of that perhaps. But I will share with you one other piece of history just to think about, because I listened to your segment before you brought me on. 30 years ago, 1994, 1995, okay, probably before your time,
Almost.
There was a former so there was an NBA championship team that had already won a championship called the Houston Rockets.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a center who was the best player in the world at the time. His name is Hakeem Olajuwon. And they had a really crummy regular season. Tell me if this sounds familiar. They lost 11 of their last 18 games. They lost like 4 out of their last 7 games. They finished the season on a 3-game losing streak. They finished with the 6th seed, 47 wins, and they won it all. And why did they win it all? Because they had championship experience and they had the best player in the world at the time, Hakeem Olajuwon. And so I'm concerned. I was at the game last night. These games don't feel good. They don't look good. However, this team does have championship experience. They've been there before. They do have the best player in the world. And, you know, I'm not blocking out my June calendar quite yet, but there's a good chance that we'll be hosting finals games in June again.
Well, I will say, to your credit, to your point, when you have the best player in the world, which I firmly believe Nikola Jokic is and has been for 4 or 5 consecutive years now, you're going to have a puncher's chance to accomplish almost anything. So let's walk down the door that you've opened. If you were to rank or bullet for me 1, 2, 3, the 3 biggest things that this current Nuggets team is not showing that they need to show if they are going to emulate the 94 Houston Rockets with Hakeem Olajuwon and go from a middle tier or lower playoff seed to win it all, what would those 3 in order of importance be for you? And maybe it's not 3.
Well, you already said it in your opening segment. The defense is just lousy. I thought I was at an ABA game last night. I mean, the Pacers, well, first of all, Pacers and Nuggets are 2 of the 4 ABA holdovers, so it's always fun to watch ABA holdovers. But I think both teams had about 100 points going into the fourth quarters. Now, I know, pardon the pun, the Pacers play at a pace that's higher than most teams. But that aside, you shouldn't be giving up 100 points at home going into a fourth quarter. That's really bad. So the defense is lousy. They've got to fix that defense. I don't know what the cure-all for that is. You know, maybe it's a bigger dose of AG. Maybe it's a bigger dose of Payton Watson. But they've got to figure out the defense. That's number 1. Number 2, I mean, it's an obvious statement. Jamal has to play basketball. He can't. He's got to be there. Without Jamal Murray, you know, we're the 2022 Nuggets and we're the 2021 Nuggets all over again. So that's number 2. And then number 3, they've got to figure out. You know, Jokic, as great as he is, you know, he is playing career high in minutes. He's playing 37 minutes a game. And he's playing 2 minutes a game higher than he's played in prior seasons. They've got to get him a little bit of rest earlier. They just got to do it. And I know it's tough, and that's a tough pill to swallow. We were all cringing in the stands last night when he sat to start the fourth quarter, and that lead just starts slipping away. But I'd rather him get some rest minutes earlier in the game so that later in the game, when you need to bring him back before that 8-minute mark in the fourth quarter, you've got a Jokic with some legs left. I mean, that's why they lost to Minnesota last year. They just ran out of gas. And they have the ignominy of being, you know, 2 of 3 teams in NBA history that have blown a 15-point lead in a game 7. So let's not have that happen again. So those would be my 3 things.
When you look at this 2022 team that we are celebrating as a milestone today, there's a couple quick questions for you on the way out that I want to ask you. One is, what in terms of an identity do you think that 2022-2023 team that won the first title in franchise history had that has since maybe gone missing or is no longer manifesting itself with the current squad just a handful of years later?
You know, if you look at all the teams in NBA history that won championships, including those 95 Rockets, if you want to go back that far, they had a couple guys on the team that are basically junkyard dogs. And the Nuggets had a few of them. They had, you know, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. They had Bruce Brown, even Jeff Green. I'm worried that we're missing that edge. We don't have those guys that are just tough dudes that are like the glue off the bench. And I think that's what we're missing. So from an identity standpoint, I think we're missing that toughness, and it's manifesting itself in the defense. And that's something that's unfortunately not going to be replaced with a week to go here in the regular season.
You mentioned KCP and Bruce Brown, and obviously KCP, the decision was made to let him walk in favor of bringing Christian Brown into the starting lineup. And I think by and large, for a first-year NBA starter, I think Christian Brown has done a lot of good things, even if there have been some shortcomings in moments or stretches of games. And Bruce Brown as that kind of sixth man, that leader of the bench unit, that spark guy that can come off and provide you spot minutes to rest your starters. Russell Westbrook hasn't necessarily, different type of player, different style, so definitely not an apples to apples replacement there. But those two players specifically, KCP and Bruce Brown, those were the hallmark additions of Nuggets general manager Calvin Booth, who took over after the departure of Tim Connolly. And it's kind of an interesting dichotomy that I think we were especially discussing in this year after the title run. And I think there's a ripple effect of it since then. So when you look at Tim Connolly, who was the original architect of this Nuggets core, he drafted Jokic and Murray. He orchestrated the trade for Aaron Gordon, bringing, shipping Gary Harris, who was definitely a fan favorite kind of glue guy, out of town, and obviously taking a chance on the development of Michael Porter Jr. But that core four, no matter what combination of health or status that they had, was not able to reach the mountaintop. It wasn't until Calvin Booth comes in and is able to bring in those other pieces. So if you were to just assign a slice of the credit pie for winning this championship, who gets the biggest slice between Tim Connolly and Calvin Booth because of their kind of respective yin-yang relationship?
Oh, that's a tough one. There's a famous quote from President Kennedy, victory has 1,000 fathers and failure is an orphan. So you've got to give Tim Connolly and Calvin Booth a lot of credit. Remember, Calvin Booth was the assistant GM to Tim Connolly. So when they made all those decisions upstream, they were made jointly, number one. Number two, Calvin Booth deserves a lot of credit for having the courage to jettison Monty Morris, to jettison, the guys that were required to bring in Bruce Brown, to bring in KCP. That was a big trade. I think that you also give Calvin Booth credit. I mean, two things can be true. Christian Brown and Payton Watson and even Julian Strother, they may not be on the level of KCP, Bruce Brown, and Jeff Green from winning a championship standpoint, but look where they were drafted. I mean,
right.
Those are great draft picks. To find guys like that late in the draft when you're hamstrung by this, the salary cap apron issue. So look, I don't know. I'm giving you a political answer, but I think credit goes to both of them. And again, as a lifelong Nuggets fan, as a lifelong season ticket holder, I never thought in my lifetime that we would see a championship banner in those rafters until Jokic got here. And then, like I said earlier in this segment, we just started feeling that good vibe coming into 2022, 2023. Just one of the greatest achievements in not just Denver sports history, but sports history. To win a championship after nearly 50 years of ineptitude. It's something else. And it's a credit not just to the organization, but you got it. Hey, look, again, Nikola Jokic, when you have a guy who's arguably a top 10, for sure, top 12 player ever, there's really no excuse not to win it. And you got to work really hard to screw it up. So let's hope they get it done again this year.
Yep, because as great as hoisting the Larry O'Brien trophy for the first time in nearly 50 years, as great as that was, when you have a player with the skill and the magnitude and just the sheer rarity of a skill set that Nikola Jokic has, that we may never see again, if not without significant evolution to the game itself, in a weird way, it does feel weird to say that, like, one title may not be enough to validate or to justify his true legacy and impact on the team and on the game itself. So here's hoping that with whatever is left of the title window in the prime of Jokic's career, that he and Jamal and Calvin Booth and Michael Malone and whatever contingency of people have their hands in the pot are able to figure things out sooner rather than later. Andy, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate your insight and your recall and taking this trip to happier days with the Nuggets that we will hopefully see again. Thank you again.
Thanks, Richie. Remember those 95 Rockets.
That's right. That's right. Hakeem the Dream, the Joker,
Yep.
You too. Have a great rest of your day, my friend. To the rest of you out there, have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Let's go have a Monday, and we will see you tomorrow at noon on all of our social media channels, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can find us anywhere at DenverSports 1043, at DEN Sports 1043, and we'll catch you then. I do what I love what I do in second nature to put in the work.